Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Now today I want to talk about a theory that I really like and get into why, and that is the Southron Ambitions theory. Now just for some background on this theory, it reads like this. During the War of the Nine Penny Kings, many great houses had to band together for the war effort. And so emerging from this conflict were a bunch of new relationships, especially between the heirs of a few great houses. And some of these relationships grew particularly strong, and with the marriages arranged between them even begin to look like alliances. And these are of the Lord Paramount houses Stark, Baratheon, Arryn, and Tully. And prior to Robert's rebellion, the networks between these houses look like this. Rickard Stark and Robert Baratheon are best friends, being fostered by Jon Arryn in the Eyrie. Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully are betrothed, and as are Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon. And the theory goes that the purpose of this alliance was to form a strong enough political body among the nobles that the Mad King Aerys could be forced to leave the throne, and the much more reasonable Prince Rhaegar Targaryen could replace him. And I want to look at this, and the reason I like this theory is that, to me, it's very clear that we were meant to look at this, because much of this info comes from the musings of Lady Barbara Dustin in some of the chapters she appears in A Dance with Dragons. And she lays out this, it's very rudimentary, but it's very clear. So it doesn't go into a lot of detail, but she's very straightforward with what she thinks was going on. And so to me, Martin has put this in our heads for a reason. And the question now for us to think about is whether what she thinks is true, or whether it's just the bitter suspicions of, a very spurned woman that has her future behind her. And to that end, I think there are some important things to consider. Firstly, Lady Dustin really does not like the Starks, at all. Really hates them to the point, she's thinking of getting Ned's bones to, desecrate them. So she's not a big fan of the Starks, especially Rickard Stark and Ned. And so for some backstory on that, firstly, she doesn't like Rickard because he wouldn't let her and Brandon Stark get married, even though she says that they had a passionate relationship. And secondly, she's annoyed at Ned because not only did Ned choose not to marry her, to go ahead and marry Catelyn like his father had wanted, but then when she married Lord Dustin instead, Lord Dustin goes with Ned to the Tower of Joy, where we know that he dies. And to add extra insult to that injury, even though Ned returned Arthur Dayne's sword to his sister, and he returned Lyanna's body to Winterfell, he never returned anything from Lady Dustin's husband back to her. So I think we need to keep in mind that the person we're hearing a lot of this from has their own point of view and reasons to be biased in the story. But anyways, so why do I like this theory? While most of the text to support it is very kind of surface level, I do think it fits very well with a lot of the subtext and a lot of the subplots that come up in the book, and especially in A Dance with Dragons. So firstly, to go along with Lady Dustin's points here and to look more at Lady Dustin, she says that she's very distrustful of the Maesters, whom she calls gray rats, to the point that she wants to wipe them out. She says, if I was queen, the first thing I'd do is kill all of them. And it's because she said that they are this organization that's in place with every important house, reading everyone's messages, writing everyone's messages, and whispering in all of their ears. And this is important because it seems like the origin of this distrust is that Lady Dustin believes Rickard's Maester Walys was manipulating Rickard, and that it was Maester Walys's idea that it was Maester Walys who suggested all of these southern marriage alliances. And I like this line of thought because it keeps with a lot of what we hear about the Maester's plots in A Dance with Dragons and A Feast for Crows. When I hear this theory, and of course, the alliance here would ultimately be a counterbalance against Targaryen power. And so I'm reminded of another similar accusation against the Maesters. This one from Marwyn the Mage, who says that the Maesters are the ones ultimately responsible for killing off the dragons. And even though we don't know exactly why, the dragons became very sickly and why people weren't able to hatch them anymore, we do learn in A Dance of the Dragons that a large number of them were killed off by killing each other. And that came from the conflict known as the Dance of the Dragons, which is the title of this book. So again, we have this very preventable conflict that is stoked by political motivations, which could have easily been manipulated by the Maesters scheming. And I also like the theory because it's supported by a lot of the events that transpire around Robert's rebellion. So, going into Robert's rebellion, after King Aerys kills Rickard and Brandon, he demands that Jon Arryn send him the heads of Rickard Stark and Robert Baratheon, who are, as I have said, they are Lord Arryn's wards up in the Eyrie. And then what does Jon Arryn do? He refuses. And now there are a lot of reasons that make sense because, they're his chargers, and this crazy king has just murdered, their family, Stark family members, with very kind of loose pretext. So it makes sense that he wouldn't want to give these, they're still kind of kids to this madman. However, we have to remember that this is a feudal monarchy. So basically whatever the king says goes. So the most correct thing for Jon Arryn to do in this situation would have been to send the heads like the king commanded. But he doesn't because, for whatever reason that relationship is there, that these strong bonds between the houses do exist, whether they're part of some grander plan or not. I also want to note here that there's an interesting detail I picked up. It's that the way I've seen this story told, everywhere I looked, the chain of events, and looking at the notes, looking in the book myself, the chain of events are as follows. Lyanna gets taken by Rhaegar, or they run away together. Regardless, Lyanna's gone with Rhaegar. Brandon and Rickard go to King Aerys to complain, and they get killed. Then the king demands the heads of Rickard Stark and Robert Baratheon. Jon Arryn refuses that order, and then he and Eddard and Robert call their banners, and that starts Robert's rebellion. So, what's the piece here that doesn't fit? Because it's really been bothering me, and I haven't gotten a good answer for it. Well, I'll tell you. The question I have here is, why does Aerys call for Robert's head as well? It makes sense to call for Eddard's head since, he just killed his family and has a good reason to worry about what Eddard would do, and maybe he thinks the Starks are out to get him. So it makes sense that he'd call for Eddard's head. But why would he call for Robert's head as well? I guess maybe it's known that Robert is friends with him, but again, I'm sure Eddard has a lot of friends, and he's the king. What does he really need to go kill him as well? Because that would set up a whole thing with the Baratheons. So, there's good reason, maybe, for him to think that Brandon, Rickard, and maybe Eddard are out to get him. So maybe he thinks the Starks are all traitors. And, of course, if someone can find some detail that explains why he asked for Robert's head as well, that, please give that to me. I'm looking for that, because this was bothering me. Because what it seemed to say is that Aerys thought that there was this Stark-Baratheon alliance against him as well. So to me, that is some support for this theory. Just moving along, looking at the lines of marriages that kind of form a lot of these alliances, we see we can look at the marriages that come after the rebellion. Some of them are planned and fell through because of deaths and such, but particularly important to me is that Hoster Tully of the Riverlands marries Lysa to Lord Arryn after he calls his banners, after Arryn had called his banners against King Aerys. And again, the most correct thing here would be for Hoster Tully to call the Riverlands against Lord Aaron in defense of the king, but he doesn't. Why doesn't he? Because the houses do have some kind of special relationship. And I think it's important to keep in mind what really these relationships are, because fostering children and arranging marriages are all a way to build alliances in this feudal system, right? So it would have been very normal for Rickard to agree to the marriage of Brandon and Lady Dustin, because it's normal to want to strengthen your relationships with your vassal. You want to strengthen that vassal and liege lord relationship. And, Lady Dustin says that this doesn't happen because Rickard has bigger ambitions. He thinks, he would rather marry Brandon to another Lord Paramount, or to the Lord Paramount's heir. But regardless, he didn't agree to that marriage for a reason, and he wanted to marry Brandon to a more important lord for a reason. And you might think, oh, he has ambitions, but what ambition does a Lord Paramount have other than being king, right? Like a Lord Paramount, you can't go any higher. You can become the hand to the king maybe, but other than that, you aren't going any. You're in the stratosphere of the hierarchy, right? So there's not much else for you to do other than, I don't know, try to overthrow a king, something along those lines. And keeping that in mind, I think it's important to look at who the relationships were being built between. It was between the Starks, the Tullys, Baratheons, Aarons. These are Lords Paramount, and they control entire portions of Westeros. That's 4 of the 7 major houses of Westeros. So, another reason I subscribe to this theory is how conspicuous it all is. It's very normal for a Lord Paramount to have a marriage pact between each other. Maybe, sure, I would buy that. But it seems a bit abnormal for them all to be making marriage alliances with each other all at the same time. And especially when an alliance between them is, more than half the power of the armies in Westeros. And that's not even mentioning that they tried to do even more. Hoster Tully first tried to arrange a marriage between Lysa and Jaime Lannister prior to the war starting, and back when Tywin and Aerys were on bad terms. And this attempt was only thwarted because Aerys made Jaime a Kingsguard and didn't let him marry anyone. And now, in Jaime's point of view chapters in A Feast for Crows, Jaime thinks that Aerys did this to spite Tywin. But again, we're dealing with character's point of view, so we don't know the real reason. However, I think it adds, another point in that plot. And really looking at this theory, I have one point that I really like that is the reason I like it so much. Regardless of what evidence there is or how much sense it makes, the reason I like it so much is that it feels right, which might be kind of a dumb... It's not the most... maybe not the most helpful descriptor for it, but what I mean to say is that thematically in the book, it fits with the kind of emotion, storytelling, and the themes of what the story is about. It fits well with the kind of story that A Song of Ice and Fire is. Because George R. R. Martin has gone out of his way in interviews and in this story to say that, it's not Lord of the Rings. And that's why I think it's so popular. Because in this book, in these stories, kings won't be good kings just because they should be the king, just because they have the right claim, and they won't win the throne just because they have the right claim. And similarly, he's even said that even the others aren't pure evil, they just have a different perspective. And so the whole point, when I look at all of these different point of view characters, and especially when we get point of view characters that work against each other, it's to say that there is no black and white, right? Everything's gray. And that's why I like this theory, because what it means is that Aerys wasn't so crazy after all. Everybody calls him the Mad King, but, you know, this theory is saying that there was a conspiracy against him. You know, there were traitors trying to dethrone him. And sure, you know, should he have burned them all alive viciously? No, that was probably not the smartest thing to do. But he, you know, this says that he was right to be suspicious of, you know, more than half of his major liege lords forming alliances. You know, if you were, I think if you were this king and you saw all of your vassals making alliances with each other, especially when you're suspicious to begin with, and you know that some of them don't like you, that would look super sketchy, right? So basically, it's a very big sketchy situation, and I think it fits nicely with a lot of the threads in the story. I have another line of thought I like to go into about how Rhaegar fits in all of this, and whether or not he was involved with this plot. And I'd like to get to that in part 2. It's an interesting look at enlightenment and the betterment of society, and how prophecy fits in with all of that. So I'm going to look at Rhaegar in part 2. Make sure you get that subscribed, and if you like this video, then like it. And if you think I did a good job explaining it, then share it to all the other non-believers. So hope you all have a nice day, nice evening, whatever time of day that you're listening to this, and I'll see you in the next video.